Today, on A Word on Westerns, Jim Beaver.
He and my old friend Hank Worden had played brothers in John Ford's Wagon Master, so we got to talk about that. It was an incredible experience. I didn't think Jim Arness liked me on that show. He didn't talk to me much, and he seemed kind of withdrawn, and it was different from what I had ever heard.
Welcome to A Word on Westerns, where we talk to the greatest Western creators of yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Rob Word. Welcome to A Word on Westerns.
Howdy, listeners. I'm RJ Word. And that's not my real voice.
But it's my real son, and he does like Westerns only because he grew up in a household that's what we were watching most of the time.
And I was the only kid in kindergarten with silver spurs. Really freaked the teachers out, too.
He's the only one who knew who Matt Dillon was, and now I have one of Jim Arness's actual Matt Dillon hats that he signed on the band, the sweatband on the inside. And the sweatband is so fragile that I'm afraid to flip it out so people can see the signature because it would fall apart. But they'll have to take my word for it. And you're going to have to take my word that today is a special show because we've got one of the best character actors out there working. You know him from The Boys. You know him from Supernatural. You know him from
Deadwood
and Justified. And he's going to talk all about those today. And his name is
Jim Beaver.
Jim Beaver. Remember that name. Jim is a true film buff. I knew about him when I'm older than him, but I was in college and he was in college writing film reviews for the magazine Films in Review, in-depth articles and really succinct information about Hollywood. He's even written a couple of books, one of them about John Garfield, a fabulous book, and one that he's been working on for about 30 years, and he's going to briefly talk about that too, is about George Reeves from The Adventures of Superman. What is it about George Reeves that drives this desire that Jim has? We've got actually 2 different locations for this interview that we're done with Jim because he had so much information. One of them is in front of the audience in the Autry Museum Theater, the Wells Fargo Theater, and the other one is in the tiny little restaurant at the Autry. So it's very intimate, and you'll hear the audience laughing in both of these because Jim is a marvel when it comes to working an audience. He's very funny and very, very talented. You've seen him dozens and dozens of times, and now you're going to hear his behind-the-scenes stories.
Jim really has a foot in both worlds, whether he's doing modern sci-fi comic book fantasy shows that appeal to my generation, or the most classic Western show of all time, Gunsmoke,
that appeal to the people of my generation. So right now, let's go to the Autry and meet Jim Beaver. Melody Ranch became a character in that series, Deadwood. It became Deadwood. On television, usually you see everybody's clean and there's no dirt on anything. Suddenly the streets were really dirty, muddy, filthy. So was the language. But it was a great show. It starred Powers Booth. It starred Ian McShane. And from Justified, Timothy Oliphant, who seemed like he came out of nowhere to play the marshal. And the clothes were great. The sets were fantastic. And we are very fortunate to have Ellsworth with us here today, Jim Beaver. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Not only did he do Deadwood for several seasons, and it was only on for 3. It should have been on for more. but he got married on it. His character got married on the show. Did 2 of the Gunsmoke TV movies with Jim Arness. Before we talk about Melody Ranch and how muddy it was, tell us about, as an actor who had, come to town working his way up to get cast with Jim Arness in a Gunsmoke movie.
Well, I came out here for something other than acting. I was actually researching a book. I write film history on the side. I came out here and there's an actor that probably most of you remember named Hank Worden. Hank was like a grandfather to me.
He was old Mose in The Searchers. All he wanted was a rocking chair.
Hank put me up at his place for about the first 4 years I was here, and that was a real experience. I got to know a lot of the people he knew, but I began getting a little acting work, and then I guess around 89, 90, something like that, Jerry Jameson and this fellow over here, Jim, cast me in the first of the 2 Gunsmoke movies I did, and that was pretty cool. It was very cool. I was flown out to... I think the first one we did was in Arizona, wasn't it? Tucson. So I got to work on the old Tucson streets where Rio Bravo and so many other things had been shot, and that was cool. About a year later, I got to work on the set of my favorite movie growing up as a kid, The Alamo in Bracketville, Texas. Didn't get to be in that because I was only 8, but showing up on the set the first day of Gunsmoke to the Last Man, I saw James Arness standing there as I was getting out of the van. And first off, I had ridden to the location with Morgan Woodward, which, among other things, it meant I didn't say much on the trip. But that was a great experience because I was really respectful of him and his career. And then I get out of the van, and there's, standing with his back to me, is that famous back you see in the opening of the Gunsmoke show. And I went, oh, I think that's him. And I was able to talk to him about, he and my old friend Hank Worden had played brothers in John Ford's Wagon Master. So we got to talk about that. It was an incredible experience. I was just telling Jim, I didn't think Jim Arness liked me on that show. He didn't talk to me much, and he seemed kind of withdrawn, and it was different from what I had ever heard. And I thought, man, I've done something terrible here because this hero of mine doesn't like me. And I never figured out what it was, finished the movie. And then about 8-10 months later, they were doing another one, and I got a call to come do a different role in it. Arness came up to me, and it was like I was his long-lost son. And he said, you know that line I didn't want to do in the last movie that they gave to you? He said, you got such a laugh, I wish I'd kept it. So I think maybe that had something to do with it. I got a laugh that should have been his. It was a real treat to work with Jim Arness. He turned out to be a lovely man and a great influence in my life.
How did Deadwood come about for you?
Deadwood was one of those things. When you're an actor, you get audition material, you get the sides, you get the script, maybe if you're lucky, and you look at it and you go, maybe I can do this, or I think I got a handle on this, or, oh, this one's going to be tough, but I'll give it a try. And I read the audition scene for Ellsworth, for Deadwood, and I thought, this one's mine. I may not get it, but it's mine. I never saw a piece of material in my life that seemed to fit more what I felt I did best. And
cuss?
Well, there was that. Well, I was a preacher's kid. I didn't know anything about cussing. Any of you believe that? I remember after I got the part, I had done a bit part in Walter Hill's movie Geronimo. And this was a good 10, 12 years earlier. And I came in and I'd done an episode of NYPD Blue for David Milch. But it was long enough ago, I didn't figure either one of them remembered me. So I did my audition, and David was sitting there smiling. And I looked over at Walter Hill, and he said, well, I'm glad to see you remember everything I taught you. And the next thing I knew, I had the part. But right after the show premiered, I was listening to NPR. They were doing a review of the show. It wasn't exactly a review. It was more discussion of the language, both the poetry of the language and the other stuff of the language. And they said, well, here's an example of what we're talking about. And they ran my opening monologue from the pilot. But on NPR, it was sort of like bleep, 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 bleep. Now, I recognize my voice, but I'm not sure anybody else did.
Well, that controversy about the language, everybody did say it was like Shakespeare, but the real controversy, and I think that's one of the things that they were trying to generate is controversy so people would be talking about the show Deadwood, is that did people really talk like that?
Well, you know, that's always been a source of debate. And in fact, David addressed it in one episode where he had a character say something along with the line, as they said in ancient Rome, blah, 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 blah. And another character says, did they really talk that way back then? But I'll tell you, I was at the same time that I was shooting the show, I was working on a screenplay of my own set in New Mexico in the 1870s, almost exactly the same time. And I was digging through old U.S. cavalry court-martial transcripts. And there's not a word you ever heard on Deadwood that wasn't in those transcripts from 1877. So I will contend with anyone who says they didn't talk like that. They just didn't write it down.
Bill Sanderson, who was in that as well, a great character actor who was in the Newhart show.
He was Larry, and this is my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl.
Okay, a terrific actor. And was a regular on Deadwood also. I was on a flight with him one time going back and forth to Vancouver on some stuff. And he said, I'm dying on this show. He says that the scripts, I get the script, the pages, they change from lunch to after lunch. And I says, we have to memorize all this stuff. I don't know what I'm going to do. What was it like?
Well, I'll tell you what it was like, particularly in terms of Bill Sanderson. Bill Sanderson played E.B. Farnham, the hotel owner. Bill's a wonderful actor, but he has a little bit of trouble with lines. I mean, he works at it. He works really hard to get his lines because he has to work really hard to get them. And he would get these monologues that David would write, sometimes the morning we shot, and he would struggle with them. And once David Milch realized that Bill struggled with these, they got longer. And longer.
How cruel.
And longer. And we would come in and say, oh, great. We only got one scene today. We'll be out of here early. And somebody will say, no, it's a Bill Farnham monologue. Oh, but we had so little preparation, and it completely changed my way of acting. I used to be one of those actors. I got to have the script a week in advance. I got to have some time to work on it. And on Deadwood, we almost never had time to work on it. You maybe got it the night before. Often you got it the night before, you stayed up all night learning it, and then you went in the morning and David would change it all.
That's what I heard.
But there was one night I went home and I asked the first AD what we were shooting the next day, and he said, I don't know. We'll shoot something.
Now, most network hour-long shows, you'll have 7 days, maybe 8 days to shoot it. These were hour-long episodes. How many days did you have?
Now, this wasn't network.
This is HBO. It's a movie.
Yeah, it was HBO. So an hour-long episode was an hour-long episode, not 42 minutes like they are on NBC or CBS now. But we would just shoot until we got done. My favorite story is I was handed a call sheet one night on my way home, and I looked at it, and it said day 19 out of 10. So we had your average hour drama on network, I guess, shoots from July to March or April, 22 episodes or so. We would shoot July to April for 13 episodes. What was really great about it was that everything we did turned out kind of looking like a movie and not looking like something that had been rushed to get it done in 8 days.
Well, they do look great. And part of it, I think, is the location, because they dressed Melody Ranch to look like Deadwood, and it transformed the look of other Westerns on television as well.
The first time I ever went to Melody Ranch was when we were having the table read for the pilot. This would have been in November of 2002. And we all gathered there on the soundstage to sit around the table and meet each other and read the script. And I took a little walk around the town. I said, oh, that's a nice Western town. This will be fun. There was nothing set up yet because we weren't ready to shoot, but it looked like Gunsmoke. I mean, it looked like flat streets and dry streets and buildings. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, we came back to start the pilot, and It looked like Nagasaki. They had put in mounds in the road because apparently they didn't have road graders in 1876. And they had brought in so much mud and so much water and so much other wet stuff. And then they had filled the streets with incredible detail. It was like stepping back into time. It wasn't like any set I've ever been on in my life. It was like stepping out of a time machine and going, well, this is what it was like. This is what it was like. And it smelled.
So, man, Jim, before you take off, I want everybody to know that we're going to change tape, but I want everybody to remember Jim from Justified, where he played the bad guy in a 13-episode arc that was great television, really wonderful scripts.
I didn't think I was bad.
Oh, he was the bad guy in that. He was good as the bad guy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. About 6 years ago, we had a guest on here who told some funny stories. He was in a couple of the Gunsmoke movies, and he's done Longmire now and Justified. He was just amazing in that. Supernatural and The Boys. You know who I'm talking about. Mr. Jim Beaver. Come on in, Jim. What is this shit? Look at this.
Only the greatest movie ever made.
And you know, I was there when they were shooting that.
That's right. That's right. I saw it. I saw a post of yours about that.
Oh gosh, you got to stay up with me, you know.
Yeah.
This is one of my most cherished moments.
Oh, I can only imagine.
And you know who I met? Hank Worden, who we're going to hear all about Hank Worden because they were roommates. Hank Worden, old Mose. I'm sorry we don't have a rocking chair for you, but we do have a chair, so have a seat.
Thank you.
Glad you're here, Jim.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, you have been so very busy.
It's insane and unexplainable.
No, the talent rises. And so I think that's why you're always working, not just as an actor, but as a writer. You've done plays, you're all over. You're so prolific, but I want to know how you became a roommate with Hank Worden.
Well, I was a huge movie fan as a kid. And I had this list of actors that I liked, and I would watch everything they were in. I would go through the TV guide every week and look for anything that certain people were in. And Hank was one of those people. I had seen him in the Searchers. I'd seen him in The Alamo and dozens of other things, but I didn't know his name. But by watching movie after movie after movie and seeing him in them, I finally caught the credits one time and he had a big enough part that he was listed in the credits. So I found his name. I wrote him a fan letter. Now, I was growing up outside Dallas. This was in the 60s. I wrote him a fan letter. He wrote me back, sent me some pictures, wrote me a long 3-4-page letter. Handwritten, yeah. And I had written him in Kara Screen Actors Guild, but he had put his home address on the envelope. And I went, well, that's an invitation.
So you packed your bags and moved in with him. Wait a minute.
Yeah. That's the short version. I wrote him back. We established this correspondence all through the rest of my high school days. Then in 68, I joined the Marines, and I was stationed in San Diego. And Hank and I still had this correspondence relationship. And one day, out of the blue, I get a call from the first sergeant's office, and he says, there's a guy on the phone wants to talk to you. I come pick up the phone, and it's Hank, and he's asking if I mind if he and his wife, Louise, drive down from L.A. to San Diego and spend the day with me. And I thought, I've died and gone to heaven, because in my mind, Hank Worden was as big a movie star as John Wayne or Randolph Scott. I was so starstruck, but I was particularly starstruck by Hank because he was so gracious and so outgoing to me.
He's always going, thank you kindly, thank you kindly.
His famous line from The Searchers. Hank and Louise came down. I was confined to base because I had done something naughty. And but they were fine. We just walked around the base and talked. And then whenever I had a weekend off or something, they would have me up to their place in Brentwood. While I was in Vietnam, I got a package, and it was a whole selection of photographs and autographs. Hank was in Durango, I think, filming Big Jake. Mm-hmm. And he had gone around on his own. I hadn't asked for this. He'd gone around to the entire cast and crew and gotten autographs from everybody. And a beautiful photo of him and Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne on the set, and which hangs in my hall now, and sent this to me in Vietnam. And I was the envy of everybody in my outfit. And then a few years later, I came out to L.A. after I was out of the service to work on a book, and I was renting a room in a frat house at USC in the summer because they were kind of half shut down in the summer. It was worse than Vietnam. It was a horrible, horrible place to live. And I was on the phone talking to Hank, and I said, man, I can't sleep here because they're partying all night long. And he said, well, by this time his wife Louise was gone, and he said, I got a hole downstairs here in the house, and nobody's in it. Why don't you just come out here? So I did, and I lived at his place in Brentwood for the next 4 years. Mm. And
what years were those?
That would have been 83 to 87.
Well, he was coming to the Golden Boot Awards at that time. Did you come to any of them, too?
The first Golden Boot Awards I went to, it was probably 93, 94, but it wasn't with Hank.
Because he sat at our table a couple of times. He was just a charming, wonderful guy. And he's so different. I mean, his rhythm of speaking and the way he was.
His voice.
Unique.
I spoke at his memorial service, and I remember speaking about this kind of voice he had, which I described as honey mixed with distant thunder. It was such a lovely voice. He was such a lovely man. Now, I had this whole other side to my life as a film historian. And you wrote, because I have issues of films in review that you wrote, a lot of time ago.
Yeah.
But
I'm an old guy.
I won't argue. Hank was, in some ways, I thought, here I am living in the house with him, sharing a house with him, and he's going to tell me all these great stories. And I would say, so John Ford, well, he was a real nice fella, and he knew exactly what he wanted.
Yep.
I mean, he did tell me some great stories. And
did you meet his circle of friends, a lot of them at this time?
Not a lot. I remember I met Dobie Carey, and it was funny because we were at, Hank was of an age where a lot of his colleagues and friends were passing away. And I spent a lot of time going to funerals with Hank. And
it gets worse, doesn't it?
It does, because now it's my friends and colleagues. But I remember we went to Chuck Roberson's funeral, we went to Lee Van Cleef's, and I remember one of Hank's headshots was shot by Lee Van Cleef, which I always thought was pretty cool. But we were at that funeral, and Dobie Carey came up to me and thanked me for taking care of Hank, and I was like, he's taking care of me, man. Hank ended up being like a grandfather to me.
Very, very special. Because Dobin, Maryland ended up moving to Durango, and I went up there for a festival with Hank and Charlie Deerkop. We were up there. We got pictures of, even Marty Cove went. They did that every year for several years. And Hank was just such a pleasure always to be with.
Yeah.
Now, let me shift gears here a little bit to talk about your role in Justified, because it's ironic. He was the bad guy that you don't know because his character's introduced seasons before the story arc that you're revealed as this terrible guy who with a sense of humor. But what's so great about that show, and I don't know that anybody else could do this, your delivery of those eloquent lines that they give you for your character, the rhythm and the difficulty to say those, but to make them just natural, is a unique gift that you have.
Well, thank you. The truth is...
See, now he's tongue-tied.
Yeah. The truth is, I think about that. I never, I studied acting in college to a certain extent, but my sense of it is that if you do, as I've done most of my life, and watch 300 or 400 movies a year, you're going to learn a little bit about acting because you're going to see so much of it. And I suspect any ability I have comes from sheer imitation of people who are a lot better at it.
Who were some of your favorites then?
Well, I had a wide range. John Wayne was always my favorite actor, starting from 11, 12 years old. But Laurence Olivier, Randolph Scott, Robert Mitchum, Katharine Hepburn, Groucho Marx. I mean, these are people I think they range very widely, but they're all at the top of what they do. And I love watching good actors. And oh boy, do I steal stuff.
Well, that's what good actors do. They shape it and make it their own. And on Deadwood, your Whitney Ellsworth character, which you had a lot of interesting dialogue in that, also flowed as if it were natural. But on Deadwood, you're the big Superman buff. I know you've been working for 50 years on trying to write this book on George Reeves. Who named you Whitney Ellsworth, the producer of the Superman show in that series?
Well, when I started shooting Deadwood, Ellsworth only had one name. He was just Ellsworth. And I went to David Milch, the creator, one day, and I said, so what's Ellsworth's first name? And he said, maybe it's Ellsworth. And that's David. He just walked off like, I don't need to fill you in on stuff. And so he was just Ellsworth, and I never knew if it was his first name or his last name until the end of the second season when Ellsworth got married.
Oh, you had to have a first name.
And they were going to shoot the wedding ceremony, and the script came out, and David had given Ellsworth a first name. I don't remember what it was, but I had been working for, as you say, about 180 years on this biography.
Longer than I thought then.
Of George Reeves, who had played Superman in the 50s. The producer of that show was named Whitney Ellsworth. And so I went to David Milch and said, look, would you mind if we called him Whitney? And he said, fine with me. And so he became Whitney Conway Ellsworth. And I've had to answer questions like this for the last 20 years.
Well, you better finish that book, too, then.
Yeah.
So how far along is the book?
How long is the book?
How far along are you on it?
Well,
I know it must be really long by now.
I mean, I'm up around 90,000 words, and I'm up to 1939. So,
well, Gone with the Wind. That's several more 100 pages, probably.
Yeah, I've been researching and/or writing since 1978, but I've only been writing since about 2020. So it's coming along slowly but massively.
I'll say.
And, well, when I started it, I was 28 years old.
What is it that drove you to the topic of George Reeves?
Well, I mean, I grew up on the Superman show, and I was always...
Well, you grew up on Winky Dink, too, but you're not going to write a Winky Dink book.
Well, that was the thing. I mean, with George Reeves, you had not only was he Superman, a guy who got to fly around and be really cool, but you had this sort of unknown factor as to how the actor died, and supposedly some kind of mystery about that. And it was vaguely intriguing. But you mentioned Films and Review, the magazine I worked for years and years ago. I was asked to write an article on Reeves. And I thought, yeah, I can do that. So I started researching, and the more I researched, the more I thought, this is a bigger story than a 10-page article.
Did you ever do a 10-page article about Reeves?
No. At some point I went...
You could only get up to like 1932 at that time.
Right. So it's coming along. I'm waiting until everybody who knows who he was is dead.
Well, we probably don't have much longer to go. Well, let's talk about something that is more recent, like Longmire. That's a terrific show, too. How did you get hooked up in that?
There was a major shift in my career when Deadwood happened. Just before Deadwood, I was, for the first time in my life, thinking I might have to do something else. I got a brand new baby. I'm not making enough. I got to figure somehow to make an income. Deadwood came along, changed all of that. And as a result of Deadwood, I began to get straight offers for jobs, that had just never happened. And Longmire was one of those. They just called up and said, come do this. It was an interesting situation. The character was a guy who had, ultimately it turned out, had committed a murder in order to help his wife, who was dying of cancer. My wife, Cecily, had just died of cancer shortly before that. And so it was one of those things where life and drama come together in a way that you don't necessarily want, but you also feel like you've got a little extra edge on how to approach this. And I've had that happen something like 3 times in the years.
I don't want to sit too
death.
close there.
Yeah. But it's a gift to me to be able to take something horrible and make something a little good, a little helpful, a little entertaining, a little dramatic out of it.
It's working, whatever it is, wherever you pull it from.
What I remember most about Longmire, though, was I had a fight scene with Robert Taylor, the new one, not the old one. And I remember it was a lot of fun. We worked on it really well. And the next day I flew home. My entire arm was covered in bruises. And I was like, where did those come from? And then I remembered that he had yanked me out of this room. And I've been hurt a few times doing stunts, but I'd never been completely, it looked like I was tattooed. And it was a short experience, brief, but I really enjoyed it. Great company, great people. And
those are well written, too.
Yeah.
The supernatural connection with the boys, that is an unusual situation that's happening. How did that come about?
Well, on Supernatural, which we just finished, I guess, last year, 15 seasons. Who gets that? I played a character named Bobby Singer, who's a demon hunter, as one is. And the joke was that the executive producer of the show was named Robert Singer, who's a well-known producer, but he didn't have anything to do with the character being named that, and was very unhappy about it because all his friends said, "You named a character after yourself?" And he said, no, I wasn't there that week. And somebody, So that show was created by Eric Kripke, who is now the creator and producer of the Amazon series, The Boys. And Eric and I get along really well. And he, for some reason, puts me in just about everything he does. And he put me in The Boys, and I guess he thought it would be funny if I had the same name. So I'm Robert Singer.
But you're going to be running for president.
I'm running for president. I have a bus with my picture on it.
Did you drive that here today?
No, I didn't. It's in the shop. So it's, Eric really likes little in-jokes for the fans. And so now he's got all these Supernatural fans thinking, is this the same character? Because he used to be this drunken bum from South Dakota, but now he's running for president. Could it be the same? Well, these days, I guess it probably could. But and he's keeping me busy there,
Well, it sure is nice to be working all the time. And you have several hundred credits now, too.
Yeah, what's that about?
That's wonderful. It means we want this guy. He must hit his mark and know his lines and delivers them well. And that's what you've done here today. And I want to thank him for coming back again. Jim has been a guest before when we were just in the coffee shop. Remember that?
Yeah.
How intimate that was?
Yeah.
Is this nice, though?
I missed that.
Theater?
I missed that intimacy.
Well, it's been closed down because of COVID, and it hasn't opened up again yet.
Well,
or I would take you to lunch after this. Did you ever work with L.Q. Jones or Bo Hopkins?
I did not. I managed to become Facebook friends with Bo, but I never met him. And LQ, I just admired from a distance. Never got to meet either one of them.
Two talented guys who from the Wild Bunch. There's a great movie too. That for me, you've got your Searchers T-shirt on, but the Searchers and the Wild Bunch are like 1 and 2 for me, and it switches back and forth.
Well, what a great argument.
Yeah, good. Well, you are the true film buff, and I thought Quentin Tarantino was, but you.
He learned a lot from me.
I see you. He did. I bet he devoured all your articles. And Jim posts on Facebook a movie that he's seen like every day for the year. Here's the movies that I've seen this past year. And just like such a diverse quality. Do you know who Robert Horner is?
I'm afraid I don't.
Oh, he was like the Ed Wood of B-Westerns.
Oh, okay.
So he's somebody to look up. So
I'll do that.
It's an interesting topic to study.
Well, I'm glad you brought up somebody I never heard of.
Okay, well, that's our job here.
Proves me to be the expert you claim I am.
Westerns. Well, he's still got a lot of learning to do, but let's give him a big hand for sharing what he does know today.
Damn, what a roommate.
Old Mose. Hank Worden. I find it fascinating that Jim was his roommate for so many years, and that also that I was hanging around with a lot of the same people and we never bumped into each other. I remember it at the Golden Boot Awards when he and a group of people who had been participating in the Deadwood series, they came and picked up an award.
That show was
awfully dirty.
Awfully dirty, but definitely an update to what Western entertainment in the home could be.
Remember this, Robbie, that it was not a movie, it was not a TV show, it was HBO.
Which used to carry weight. Unless HBO, wants to pick up our show, in which case, HBO, we love you.
We love it. And we love you out there for tuning in to listen to these tales of Western history with the people who made them.
Thanks for listening, and happy trails.
If you enjoy what we do here, please take a moment to follow our show and share these interviews with your friends. You can also find A Word on Westerns on Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you, and see you next week on A Word on Westerns. A Word on Westerns is produced and hosted by Rob and RJ Word. Edited by Alex Lockett and Boar and Ebor Dro. Location audio is provided by Richard Reagan. Sound design by Alex Lockett. A Word on Westerns theme song was composed by Karel Pasoda with additional arrangements by Shipwreck Music and RJ Word.